Okay, so we're checking out another 2.5-inch Cinewhoop. This is the Grotesque25 from TCMMRC, and I've done a few other models from TCMMRC, and of course they're known for being like the ultra budget quad manufacturer. Basically, if you see my other videos on this manufacturer, in order to keep the costs super low, in this case this one here is coming in at about $125. They don't really give you a lot of extra, no frills and stuff. It's basically the cost of the parts put together with a really basic configuration slapped onto the flight controller, and they're all sold as plug and play, so you have to add a receiver. And yeah, I mean, I'll link some of the older videos to some of the ones I'll reference in this video down in the video description. Some of these things I'll talk about were mentioned before, and I probably talked about them in more detail than in this video. Now, this frame that they're using here is actually not their design. This is from a company called Oddity RC, and they also sell these frames on AliExpress. They run about $25 to $30 depending on which store you get them at. They're sold at a variety of stores. They have they have a 2-inch version and a 2.5-inch version. I believe they have a 3-inch version as well. This one is called the XI25. There is a XI25 Pro version, which is slightly different from this one that just recently came out. So this is the first XI25. And yeah, so it looks like TCMMRC, they've basically acquired this frame, and then they've put their parts into this frame, because obviously you can build it out in a number of different ways. And of course, TCMMRC, they make a bunch of quad parts, and I've talked about that previously. First, let's just quickly talk about what you get in the box. Of course, you get the quad here. You can see I have the battery and the Action 2 installed on here, because I want to show you the weight, and I'll show you that here in a second. You do get some foam bumpers for the prop guards, so you can stick them on the side here. So if you happen to fly indoors and you're bumping into walls and don't want to mark up your walls, you can stick this on. So does add a little bit more weight. You get some zip ties. You get this USB, micro USB to USB-C adapter. And well, the reason I give you this is because the micro USB port right there on the flight controller, which is not really coming in focus, is blocked by the standoff. But even with this adapter, I cannot get the plug in there. You have to remove the standoff. There's a screw here and a screw underneath right here. Remove those two screws, and the standoff will just pop out, and then you'll have access to the micro USB port for setting it up. And then you get some spare props as well. So these are I think these are gem fans, I believe. Okay, no, they're not. They're Racer Star. So these are some gem fan clones. I assume that the ones that are already on here, the gray ones, are also from Racer Star. This is basically just a 3-bladed 2.5-inch with a bull nose. Not that noisy, surprisingly. I flew it around quite a bit and really not that noisy at all. And then you get a spare set of, looks like M2 screws. And that's everything you get in the box. And before I talk about the rest of the specs, I do want to show you what this thing weighs. And this is with the 4S battery and the Action 2 with the Action 2 mount. It's coming in at a little over 300 grams, but just a hair over 300 grams. So if you're wondering if this is, going to work for under sub 250, probably not, unless you got a really tiny battery on here. And this is a 1000 milliamp hour 4S, and the reason I have it like this is, even though this is really meant for 6S, and I'll explain why in a second, is because the Action 2 is angled like this, and you can see it. I don't want it touching the battery. But if you use the 6S battery, the one I used was this one here, this Tattoo 6S 650 milliamp hour battery. It ends up resting, the camera rests on the battery, and so the extra vibrations from the frame will come through to the back of the camera where the screen is, as well as through the mount here. And as you can see, this camera mount is not mounted with a soft mount. It's directly mounted to the frame where the motors are, of course, mounted. So we're going to get some motor vibrations in here. Now the Action 2 seems to be okay. I'll link the full 4K footage of the gyro flow stabilized video from the Action 2, and it's pretty good. It's nice and smooth, even though this is shaking quite a bit in the wind. You don't see any of that in the stabilized footage. Now, that's because this gyro is probably not as sensitive as some other cameras. So like the Session 5 or the Hero 7, for example, have pretty sensitive gyros, and those probably aren't going to work so well with this hard-mounted setup. The gray TPU part here is attached to the drone that comes with the drone, but this amount here for the Action 2 and of course the Action 2 itself not included. If you're interested in getting this part here, I do have that available for sale. Contact me if you want that. Now the fact that it's hard mounted, this whole setup here, this frame, I've talked about this frame a long time ago in a previous video I think it was in reference to the Pavo 25 video from Beta FPV. And that model is very similar to this one as well. You got the inverted motors, you got this sort of prop guards that can come off separately from the main part of the frame. So basically the electronics and the motors, everything are attached to this main plate, and then the prop guards kind of come on through some standoffs. And the same concept applies to the Pavo 25. And I think I mentioned this frame in that video because the camera, all the camera stuff here is all hard mounted to this main plate, including the FPV camera and the HD cameras. So not ideal. Those wouldn't necessarily be my first choice. Now this one here comes in at $125, whereas the Pavo 25, which is very similar to this, is $100 more. It's like $225 for the analog version, not the digital version. So, for those of you that were looking for something a little bit more budget, this is one way to go. But there's some downsides to that. I'll explain here in a second. The motors on here 1404, just like on the Pavo 25, but these are 2750 kV, and they have this like rose gold color paint on here. Pretty nice. They're smooth, not that noisy, good bearings, not a bad motor, but it's strange that they're choosing 2750 kV because they're obviously targeting this for 6S, which means you have to go for this bigger battery. Oh yeah, and then I forgot to mention the reason why I went with that is because the FPV camera is angled like this and the Action 2 is angled like this, I can't have a big battery back here without it bumping against the battery. And the reason this camera is like this is because this is I guess a design flaw of this frame, or maybe it's because they've added this little protection piece here. When this is on, you can't angle this FPV camera down any further, so you're forced to that angle. And if you want to match the footage compared to your flight angle, you gotta also have the camera like this, and that's why I went with the 4S battery. Now, regarding the in terms of the setup, it comes with just default PIDs from Betaflight. So if you fly with the 4S battery, it's going to be a little bit more wobbly and drift more. So you're going to want to increase your P&D gains with the sliders to which you feel is appropriate for the 4S setup. It will fly on 4S, even though the KV is pretty low. It flies fine on 4S. Now, if you go on the 6S battery, you're going to want to decrease the P&D gains from default, because on the default PIDs from Betaflight on 6S, you get a little bit of vibrations and some oscillations. So it's basically gains are a little bit too high for 6S, but a little bit too low for 4S. So you're going to need to make some adjustments depending on what battery you're using and how much weight you're carrying. So some amount of knowledge or PID tuning will be required. Basically, like I said, just increase the P&D gains with the sliders on 4S batteries and decrease it on 6S. That'll get you in the general ballpark, and then obviously you want to mess around with the filters. And that's basically how I flew it. And the receiver I added here in the back. You can see I didn't even cut off the servo connector this time here, because I get so many of these TCMMRC models, and they all come with this little servo connector that plugs into the flight controller, which is right back there. You can see the little plug that's on the flight controller. It's all an S-Bus setup, and so I'm using an XM Plus receiver here with this little servo connector. This plugs right in, and then I'm using one of their zip ties here to hold it in place in this little section here. and then I have the antennas held into place on the prop guards to keep it out of the props so they don't get cut up with some tape. So that seems to work. There's probably better ways to do that. I just, I'm gonna probably just disconnect this later. Probably not gonna be keeping this one forever. And if you want to have a better place to put the receiver, probably take this bottom plate off, these 4 screws here, and then you can put it between this plate and the video transmitter. Now the stack here is a 20x20 stack. The flight controller and the video transmitter, I think, is the same one that was in the Concept 195 video that I made. That video is like, that was a 5-inch ultralight. It was from like 3 or 4 months ago. But I think they changed the 4-in-1 AC. So the one that's in the Concept 195 was a 20 amp 4-in-1 AC. This is a 40 amp 4-in-1 AC, and it does 2 to 6S. So I think that's the only change in terms of the parts. But again, TCMMRC, they just make a bunch of, they make motors and flight stacks, electronics. Those parts tend to change over time, and even though you're watching this video probably April 2023, if you're watching this sometime in the far future, the stack might be a little different. I'm not really sure why they don't have an all-in-one, because this frame does support an all-in-one. You can see the hole here for a 25x25 whip style board. That's what most people would probably build this out with, but of course this frame does take a 20x20 stack. So you have 3 boards in here. You have the 4-in-1 AC, you got your flight controller, and then you got your video transmitter down at the bottom there. But most other people will probably build with an all-in-one, with basically the flight controller, AC, and a whip board, and then a separate video transmitter. Just, you can go either way. With this frame, it does accommodate both styles. The video transmitter is analog, of course, 400 milliwatt max. It is defaulted to raceband 1, 56, 58 is the frequency. Don't know what power level it's on because it does not have smart audio connected, as is typical for TCMMRC. You'll have to refer to one of my old videos, and I'll talk about how you can fix that. It's the same way. Basically, they just cut the wire, and you have to put that wire back in and set up smart audio if you want to work with smart audio on the video transmitter. It does work, it's just that it's not wired and not set up in Betaflight. So for those of you who know how to fix that, it's probably a pretty simple fix, but I'll refer to some of the old videos and you can find the instructions on how to do that. I think I've explained it in 2 or 3 older videos, so I'm not going to do it again in this video. Yeah, so that's pretty much it here. The parts here are very basic, nothing really special about them. They work. You're not going to get massive amounts of performance out of this. Especially this was a Cinewhoop, it's going to be for cruising. But if you want to get into, basically the ground floor of Cinewhooping on an analog setup for about $100, $125 here, not bad, because you can't really beat the price. Now the fact that you do have to do some tuning on it, and for some people it could be a deal breaker. It took me just a few seconds to move a couple sliders around, so not like it was killing me or anything like that. But yeah, for those of you that are really intimidated by PID tuning, that could be a deal breaker for you. Let me go ahead and take all this off, and then let me show you what it weighs without the camera and the battery. Alright, this is how much it weighs. No camera, no battery. 157.6 grams. Alright, so bottom line is very nice price, nice good budget price. It works, but you're going to have to probably do some tuning on it, and things like the parts aren't the top quality parts here on the market. So if you're looking for like better customer support, or a PID tune out of the box, you're probably going to be paying at least double. I think the Pavo, as I said, the Pavo 25 is like $225, and there's some iFlight models out there. Of course, you're going to get really good customer support from. You're going to get better customer support from companies like iFlight or Beta FPV versus a company like TCMMRC. They're just basically putting parts out with a basic configuration, and you're kind of left on your own. So that's sort of the price you pay for having a lower cost drone. If you want something really cheap, then obviously you got to compromise somewhere, and that's pretty much where you're going to be making those compromises. Anyway, that's going to cover for this video. Links down in the video description, as I mentioned before, to check out all that stuff. That'll do it for this one. Talk to you guys in the next video.